And a quorum is present, so I will call this meeting of the Plan Commission of June 26, 2023 to order. First, we will hear from our technical facilitator.
All right, welcome to our virtual Plan Commission meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose your connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak or ask questions. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which their hand is raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After all items register and speak, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesse. First is agenda item 1, Legistar 60306, Plan Commission public comment period. I don't see anyone registered for public comment. Is that correct, Heather? Okay, very good. Then we will move on. Communications, disclosures, and recusals. Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Do we have any disclosures or recusals? Seeing no raised hands, it looks like we do not. Moving on to the minutes of June 12th, regular meeting 2023. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing no raised hands, is there a motion to approve? Moved by Commissioner Solheim. Is there a second? Seconded by Alder Duncan. We will go to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. I just noticed that under schedule of meetings, we are not showing anything. Heather, could you note what our next couple of meetings are, please?
I will. My apologies. Let's see. We will have our next meeting of July 10th. And then we'll have another regular meeting on July 24th.
Okay, great. Thank you, Heather. Moving on, special items of business. We have several elections on the agenda. First, under agenda item 12, Legistar 78498 is election of Plan Commission Chair. Do we have a nomination for chair? Commissioner Solheim.
I will move to nominate Commissioner Zellers for the position of chair.
Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Heck. Are there any other nominations for chair? Seeing none, we'll come to a vote. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. I think. Agenda item 3, Legistar 78499, election of Plan Commission Vice Chair. Is there a motion for Commissioner Heck?
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Solheim for Vice Chair.
Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. Any other nominations for Vice Chair? Seeing none, we will come to a vote and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Next on the agenda item 4, Legistar 78501, Plan Commission appointment to the Joint Campus Area Committee. Is there a nomination? Is there someone who would like to volunteer to be the Joint Campus Area Committee appointment? Commissioner Mendez. Okay. I will take that as a nomination of Commissioner Mendez. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Heck. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, we will come to a vote and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, motion passes unanimously. Next is agenda item 5, Legistar 78502, Plan Commission appointment to the Transportation Commission. Is there a nomination? Commissioner Heck.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner McCahill for Transportation Commission.
Seconded by Alder Figueroa Cole. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, we will come to a vote and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. And I would like to thank everybody who has agreed to serve in these roles, particularly those people who are serving on another commission or committee, because it is a big responsibility. So thank you for agreeing to do that. Next on the agenda is agenda item 6, Legistar 78520, approving an amendment to the Plan Commission Policies and Procedures Manual to modify the timing of when the election of the chair and vice chair shall occur. And I would like to, if there is no, with the agreement of the commission, make 2 other small amendments. One is change the Transportation Policy and Planning Board to the Transportation Commission in our Policies and Procedures Manual, because TPPB no longer exists. It's all Transportation Commission now. And then also to change the word aldermanic to alder throughout our Policies and Procedures Manual. We're gradually making those kinds of changes. Commissioner Shepard.
Yeah, also, should we make sure the language is gender neutral or inclusive? Got the his and her in there and that sort of thing. And I think we want to move away from that. Thank you.
Okay. And so that would be another change. Okay. So we'd be changing the date, changing from TPPB to Transportation Commission, changing from aldermanic to alder, and making all the language gender neutral. Okay. Alder Figueroa Cole, did you have anything, or you wanted to make a motion on that? Yes. Okay. So Alder Figueroa Cole has moved to approve those 4 changes. Is there a second? Seconded by Alder Duncan. Alder Figueroa Cole, did you wish to speak to your motion?
No, I think those changes make sense at this moment. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Next are public hearings, but before we do that, I will move to the consent agenda. The consent agenda, which includes also referrals. It is the custom of the Plan Commission to remove from the agenda those items on which staff believes an application has had sufficient review to warrant approval with all of the conditions placed upon it. The applicant accepts those conditions, and there are no individuals who have registered to speak in opposition. Those items are placed onto a consent agenda, and we will address those at the beginning of our meeting. Of the items before us today, the following are proposed for the consent agenda. Agenda item 10, Legistar 78146, amending section 9.29 and 28.151 of the Madison General Ordinances to update regulations for tourist rooming houses. Agenda item 14, Legistar 77932, located at 4687 Verona Road, 10th Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a restaurant. Agenda item 15, Legistar 77933, located at 4687 Verona Road, 10th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the Commercial Center District for a vehicle access sales and service window to allow construction of a new one-story restaurant with a vehicle access sales and service window. Agenda item 16, Legistar 77934, located at 4953 Hepker Road, 17th Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a single-family residence. And for referral, agenda item 17, Legistar 77935, located at 5106 Spring Court, 19th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use to construct an accessory building on a lakefront parcel, and that is to be referred to July 10th at the request of the applicant. And finally, agenda item 18, Legistar 77939, located at 4711 East Park Boulevard, 17th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the Suburban Employment Center District for a hotel to allow construction of a 4-story, 124-room hotel on future lot 57 of the American Center East Park 6th Edition subdivision. Are there any requests for separation of any of those items? Alder Figueroa Cole.
We have a speaker for item 14.
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
There's a speaker for item 14.
Oh, okay, then that will come off of the consent agenda. Thank you very much, Alder.
Thank you.
As I look at 14 in our most recent listing of registrants, I see registrants, but no one who wishes to speak. Heather, could you clarify, please?
Yes, there is just a brand new registrant. Alder Figueroa Cole is right. So
Okay,
just come
great.
in the last few minutes.
Okay, and I will leave it to you then to call on that person when we get to it, Heather. Thank you. And thanks again, Alder.
Also, Heather, can you please resend the link? Because apparently that person is watching online and doesn't have access to the Zoom link. Please.
Okay, I will coordinate with the tech facilitator.
Thank you so much.
Yep,
Thank
I'll
you.
check into that right now.
Thank you.
Okay, so that means that 14 is off the consent agenda. Commissioner Mendez.
Oops. Yes, Chair. Should we pull 15 off as well, since 14 and 15 are for the
Yeah.
same project?
Thank you. Yes, both of them will be pulled off. Thank you. Alder Slack?
Yes, thank you. I just want to make sure I'm clear on Legislar item 77935. I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me. I think it's 17, 77935 to be referred to July 10. Is that the correct Legislar number for that one?
77935.
I just know that there's some residents that want to be able to speak to this. I don't know if they're here today. Is it that they must return on July 10th, or are there opportunities? Are there any registers to speak to that item today?
I don't believe we do have any registrants for that. No, we do not.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then the consent agenda, and again, items 14 and 15 are off the consent agenda. So you see before you those items that are still on the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Commissioner Solheim. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Solheim? Okay. Did anyone have anything to say about any of these items? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the consent agenda passes unanimously. Thank you. Then moving on to tax incremental finance districts. I will read all of these in and then ask if anyone has any questions on any of these. We have Dan Rolfs here tonight from staff who can answer questions. So agenda item 7, Legislar 78303, approving the creation of the project plan and boundary and use of the half-mile rule for tax incremental district 52, East Washington and Stoughton Road, City of Madison. Agenda item 8, Legislar 78312, approving the project plan and boundary and use of the half-mile rule for tax incremental district 53, East Wilson Street, City of Madison. Agenda item 9, Legislar 78314, approving the creation of the project plan and boundary and use of the half-mile rule for tax incremental district 54, Pennsylvania Avenue, City of Madison. Are there, let me see, do we have any registrants? I don't believe we do, but just want to make sure. Yes, we do for agenda item 9. I will open the public hearing, and we have a registrant for agenda item 9, Douglas Nelson, District 18, Shasta Drive, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. Douglas, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Douglas Nelson. I'm a long-term Northside property owner and a business owner, and my property falls in this TIP district. And I got a lot of questions about this. First question, well, on the intended purpose page of the TIP district number 54, it states the city has established that the health of the Madison economy and its neighborhoods is vital. Well, we know from the report that the Hartmeyer family did, the Rambo report done in 2019, that the land that they want to in this TIP district is completely contaminated. And is the purpose of this TIP district to clean up that contamination? That's one question I have. On the legal description of the TIP district number 54, on top of it states the wetland areas are specifically excluded from inclusion in the TIP district number 54. So why was the wetland included in the calculating the 58% blight? Another question I have. How can, I don't know how vacant land can be called blighted. So that's another question. And I'm trying to figure out how could railroad property be classified as blighted while it's in use? It's a working business, vital to our way of life, not just on the north side of Madison, but throughout the state of Wisconsin, throughout our entire country. Without the wetland and the railroad property not classified as blighted, then this TIF district would fall outside of the state requirement of the 50% blight. I think it's really premature for Plan Commission to vote on this tonight until a lot of the property owners have had a say so and have answered the questions have been answered. You know, this report is based on someone's opinion and not fact. I feel that a discussion within the city planners, with the city planners and the property owners in the TIP district is warranted. I personally have many questions as a property owner in this TIP area that I should have a voice in what's going to happen with my property. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. And we have a second registrant, Chad Gebhardt, Pennsylvania Avenue, Madison, neither support nor opposed and wishing to speak. Chad, you have 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I am also a property owner, business owner on Pennsylvania Avenue. I've been reading through the reports. I guess my biggest concern is that my property was considered blighted. I'm very curious on, I guess, what the protocol for considering a property blighted is. If a property can come out of blight, I take pride in my property and the upkeep of it. It's been renovated on the exterior and interior several times over the last couple decades that I've owned it. And I guess my biggest concern is that it's thrown into blight, and that kind of label is definitely not going to help me in any regards down the road. So I guess just in summary, and going off of what Doug said, I'm just wondering, was it just picked at random of what properties were blighted so it could fit into the state standards of what's needed for a TIF district and percentage? And I'm wondering what the protocol for the blighted properties was, and if a property, once it's considered blighted, can be taken off and be considered unblighted in the future. And that's all the questions that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. That Chad is our last registrant. Are there questions for either Douglas or Chad? Heather.
Yes, I just wanted to add there are 2 other registrants who are registered, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions.
Okay.
Shall we read those into the record at this point? On this item number 9, we have Riley Wedekind of Comanche Way, neither support nor opposing and available to answer questions. And then also on item 7, we have Jason Soka of Commercial Avenue. Again, neither supporting nor opposing and available for questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Heather. Are there any questions of any of our registrants? Are there questions of any of our registrants? I do have a question of, well, I'll ask it of Douglas. Did you receive notification when the blight study was being done and information on the blight study?
I did not. The first notice I received was probably 2 weeks ago. And that's the first time I heard of it. And let me see, actually, I take that back. It was June 2nd of this year. So
Okay.
that's the first time I heard of it.
Okay. And was there anyone noted to contact in regard to questions?
There was, it was the TIF review board at cityofmadison.com. I sent them an email requesting the parcel numbers that were involved with the TIF district. I have yet to have a response.
Okay. Thank you, Douglas. Anyone else have any questions of any of the registrants? Seeing no raised hands, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Shepherd.
Hi, yeah, if staff could talk about notification of, once again, properties that are included in a blight study, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Dan?
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate the question. Y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. When the city creates a tax increment district, the state of Wisconsin TIF law requires that when we are creating a blighted area district, that we provide notice to all property owners that own property that is determined to be quote unquote blighted, as defined in the state statutes. You can see the blight study that was completed by an outside consultant that's attached to the resolution. The definition of blight is included under section 2 in that study, and it's very broad. It's very expansive. We try to remove some of the subjectivity from that definition, and you can, if you like, you can go in and review the blight study itself and the actual evaluation tool that we've worked very hard with our consultant to try to have something that is objective. From there, we have a final result that we get from our consultant. We do not look at anything specific as far as the results other than what they are. This is meant to, again, provide additional buffer between the city and the decision makers and the actual result of the study. Once that result is in, we then map everything and provide notices as required under state statutes. The one other comment that I would make about this is you probably guessed that we don't get a lot of Christmas cards or thank you letters when we send out these notices to property owners. However, what I reiterate to folks when I get emails or phone calls about this is this blight study is a snapshot in time. It's right then, that day, that time when it was taken. It's meant to provide a one-time look at those properties in that area and give us, as the city, as staff and policymakers, the ability to potentially utilize tax increment finance as a funding tool for city projects. In no way, shape, or form does a finding of blight impact anybody's tax bill, their ability to sell or buy or lease or do anything else with their property. It is not a cloud on title. It does not change the building code enforcement or building inspection rules or requirements. We don't send anybody out the next day to start, looking for things like that. It's simply a way that allows us as the city, should policymakers be so inclined, to create a tax increment district and then potentially have access to additional financial resources to invest in areas throughout the city, in this case, the near north side and the Oscar Mayer area. So does that answer your question, Commissioner? Very good. Thank you.
Are there further questions? Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. Dan, just a couple of questions. With regard to what you were just speaking about, I just wanted to reiterate, I assume you can reiterate that what you can do with your property is also not impacted by being in a TIF district, correct?
That is correct. Being in a TIF district or not being in a TIF district has no impact in any way, shape, or form on what you can or cannot do with your property. All of the existing building code rules, zoning rules, setbacks, certified survey maps, every other rule continues to apply, and for up, down, or otherwise, regardless of what you are or are not doing with your property. So if your property is in conformance with the zoning code, then you're still in conformance. And if you're not, you're still not. All of the things that were true before the creation of the TIF district are still true afterwards. It's really just a way that the city can potentially access additional resources to invest into a particular geographic area.
Okay, thank you. I do have a second question on a different subject, but it's still related to TIF. I noticed in I guess it's TID 54 that there are listed as developer loans, I guess, for the project on Roth Street. I think I've got the numbers right. And I was just curious why in some circumstances, projects like that are listed under affordable housing, whereas this one is listed under a development grant, even though it has affordable housing in the project. Is it really just because it's not affordable housing funds, therefore it's going through economic development rather than community development?
It's a fair question. In this case, what's going on is we have a particular project. In this case, as you note, the Roth Street development with Lincoln Capital folks. So we know that there is a loan that, if approved by council, would then go forward and be an economic development loan to that particular project. However, we oftentimes will have funds set aside for affordable housing. Those can be used for other things. So if we had another project like that, we could use those funds there. If we had a place where we were going to do some affordable owner occupied units, we could use that there. We could additionally potentially use it for things like home buyer assistance, other things that are affordable housing related, but are not specific to a project. So it gives us a little more flexibility when it comes time to actually access those dollars. I don't want to say that they're unaccounted for, or they're undesignated essentially, but they're available for that particular type of use, but they're not associated with a particular address.
Thanks. You know, I when I looked through the plans, my eyes are drawn to the line that says affordable housing 0 on a couple of them. But then if you dig deeper, there are projects being considered. So that was why I had that question. It's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. 2 questions, Dan, related to that. So the affordable housing line, as I was reading that, I was wondering, I think, does that kind of make it clear that the intention is to extend it 1 year to utilize the affordable housing state law, that the additional increment can be used for affordable housing?
For the additional year you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, that is our standard practice to include that notice, but it requires an additional council action at the end of the life of the TIF district.
Great. Thank you. And then going back to those developer loans, I assume the ones for Roth Street and then also for the Gardner Bakery are structured as developer financed or PAYGO loans?
We do not do developer finance PAYGO. The rationale for that is that for those of you who aren't familiar with it, PAYGO it's pay as you go. It is a method that communities use to financing generally when they do not have the borrowing capacity of Madison. Madison is I think we're north of $38 billion of assessed value. So we do not have issues with the borrowing cap. Dave Schmiedeke can speak more thoroughly about that. Smaller communities that have reached that borrowing cap use PAYGO. It allows them to access this type of financing However, it is a loan that the developer takes out through a bank. So it's by definition, it's at a higher interest rate. And it is oftentimes for a longer period of time. So we don't need to do that because we borrow at a lower interest rate and we pay it back in a shorter period of time. So it's more financially beneficial for us to simply make it a straight TIF loan, like we've done with all of our other loans.
That's great to hear. Thank you for clarifying. That's all I have.
Okay. Are there other questions? I don't see any raised hands. I do have a question about the railroad question that one of our registrants raised. Is our railroad properties included in a blight study, and are they determined to be blighted, or what's the deal with railroads?
Fair question. Thank you for asking. So in the blight study itself, I'm looking at the study right now. The properties that are owned by the railroad, so you can see the actual rail yard, I believe, was found to be blighted in the study itself. Let me pull up my map here. One moment. So that property was found to be blighted. We did not do the blight study. We have like I've noted before, we have an outside consultant do that, but the rail yard itself appears that it was found to be blighted. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Yeah, it does. So then it would be included in the total blight area of the TID.
Yes, that's correct.
And same question for the wetlands. Are wetlands included in a blight study?
We have surveyed all of these properties. Our consultant surveyed all of these properties. And the challenge we have is that we don't know where the wetlands are because we can't do a wetland delineation because it's not public property. However, by state statute, we cannot include wetlands in a TID. So the direction from the Department of Revenue is to include that statement in our legal description to ensure that we are specifically not including those properties in the district when it comes to the legal description itself. However, at some future point, they may be further delineated. This happened in TID 39, for example. We had properties that were subdivided following the creation of the district, and those wetlands were then effectively no longer part of the TID. And that's what would happen here if and when wetlands are ultimately delineated.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. I didn't know that. Commissioner Shepard.
Yeah, hi, Dan, if you could address, because the issue was brought up earlier, contamination. How would this process deal with or address the issue of soil contamination, possible soil contamination? Thank you.
Certainly. I will confess that I am not the city engineer. I play him on TV every now and then, but Bryn Bemis, who is the city engineer who manages these things, is much smarter than I am with this sort of stuff. That being said, any development that occurs, whether we put TIF into it or not, has to comply with any and all requirements related to environmental cleanup, environmental contamination, etc. I know there is concern about the properties, the Hartmeyer properties, and I am aware that the development group has committed to making efforts to ensure that any development that does occur there deals proactively with any contamination that's found. As far as what contamination is or is not there, or how that cleanup process occurs, that's a little outside of my wheelhouse. But I will say that we've done loans to projects in brownfields before. We've had projects with redevelopment in brownfield areas. The Union Corners project is one of those. We've had, a bunch of the downtown projects have had brownfield issues. So it's not our first rodeo in that regard. It's just part of the process of doing development in an urban area.
Okay, great. Are there further questions of staff? Further questions of staff? Seeing no raised hands, I would be looking for a motion first on agenda item 7, Legistar 78303. Do we have a motion? Commissioner Solheim.
I will move approval of the creation of the project plan and boundary and use of the half-mile rule for TID number 52.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Alder Figueroa Cole. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Solheim?
No, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments about this motion? Input? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to agenda item 8, Legistar 78312, approving the project plan and boundary and use of the half-mile rule for TID 53. Do we have a motion? Commissioner Solheim.
I move approval of the creation of the project plan and boundary and use of the half-mile rule for TID number 53.
Is there a second? Seconded by Alder Figueroa Cole. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Solheim?
No, thank you.
Okay. Are there any comments or input? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Moving on to agenda item 9, Legistar 78314, approving the creation of project plan and boundary and use of the half-mile rule for TID 54. Do we have a motion? Commissioner Solheim.
I move approval of the creation of the project plan and boundary and use of the half-mile rule for TID 54.
Is there a second? Seconded by Alder Figueroa Cole. Commissioner Solheim, did you wish to speak to your motion?
I just want to say thank you, Dan, for the additional information on the Blight District. That may be something, if you don't already, that would be helpful to send out to residents when that notification is sent, or maybe even have on the website, because I think that was really helpful to walk through.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Figueroa Cole, did you have information? No.
No, I'm sorry.
No. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any other discussion or input? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Okay, agenda item 10, we passed on the consent agenda. Then we move on to agenda items 11, 12, and 13, which are related and will be considered as one public hearing. Following the public hearing, the Plan Commission will make separate findings and motions on each agenda item. The first agenda item, 11, Legistar 69791, 428, 434, and 444 State Street, Second Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to allow demolition of 3 mixed-use buildings. First, let me read all of them in, and then agenda item 12, Legistar 69792, at the same address, consideration of a conditional use in the downtown core district for a new building and consideration of a conditional use for non-residential development immediately adjacent to the boundary of a city-owned public park to allow construction of a 6-story tall mixed-use building containing up to 6,445 square feet of commercial space and 26 apartments adjacent to Lisa Link Peace Park. Agenda item 13, Legistar 69800, approving a certified survey map of property owned by J.D. McCormick, LLC, located at 428 through 444 State Street, also Second Alder District. First, we will hear from our staff person, Tim Parks.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Plan Commission. The three items before you have to do with the demolition of three two-story mixed-use buildings in the 400 block of State Street adjacent to Lisa Link Peace Park. The site is 6,928 square feet in size, and as the chair noted, it is zoned downtown core DC zoning. Following demolition, the applicant is proposing to construct a 6-story tall mixed-use building with 5 total floors that will contain 6,285 square feet of commercial space on the ground floor and in the basement, as well as 25 apartments on the upper floors. And the lot will be combined into one lot by certified survey. The 3 buildings to be demolished, moving from east to west, 428 State Street, constructed in 1893, 434 State Street, constructed in 1899 and remodeled in 1996, and 440 through 444 State Street, constructed in 1962. The project before you is requesting approval of a demolition permit to raise the 3 buildings, conditional use approval for construction of a new building in downtown core zoning, as well as development of a non-residential building, which includes mixed-use buildings such as the one proposed adjacent to a city park, in this case, Lisa Link, as well as the one lot certified survey map. I will note that the project has been under review for approximately 18 months. If the Plan Commission is so inclined, the plans that it should approve tonight are dated May 18th, 2023. They are at least the 4th version of plans to be submitted to the city for review. Considering consistency with adopted plans, staff will note that the proposed project is consistent with the mix of uses and the general scale and intensity of development anticipated if redevelopment occurs in the 400 block of State Street. The downtown plan calls for a maximum of 4 stories at the State Street facade, stepping back to no more than 6 once a 30-foot step back is observed. Ground floor active uses, upper floor employment or residential, in this case residential. However, the downtown plan also encourages preservation and rehabilitation of sound older buildings, which could include all 3 of the buildings per the direction provided by the Landmarks Commission when they reviewed the demolitions informally on January 31st, 2022, when the project first began through the formal review process. The Plan Commission should give careful consideration to the recommendations of the Landmarks Commission, which found in one form or another that all 3 buildings contributed to the historic character and that of State Street, and that all 3 buildings had historic values. However, given due consideration of the Landmarks Commission's recommendation, should the Plan Commission find that the demolition permit standards are met, staff believes that the conditional use standards can also be found to be met, subject in particular to the conditions of approval provided by the Parks Division regarding impacts on Lisa Link Peace Park. And finally, staff will note that the Urban Design Commission did, after repeated attempts, make a recommendation to approve the May 18th, 2023 plans, having previously referred the project in earlier forms on 2 other occasions, both earlier this year and once last year, due to considerable concerns about the design, which staff feels have largely been addressed. The Urban Design Commission, on a 5-3 vote on May 31st, did recommend or provide an advisory recommendation to the Plan Commission, I should say, granting their equivalent to final approval based on what type of brick would be used. And so again, before the Plan Commission requests to demolish the 3 buildings, conditional use approval for new construction in downtown core and adjacent to Lisa Link Peace Park and the one lot CSM. And staff would be happy to answer questions following the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. We do have registrants. I will open the public hearing. First registrant, Kevin Burrow, Greenway Boulevard, Middleton, in support, wishing to speak, representing Kanothi Bruce Architects. Kevin, you have 3 minutes.
Great. Good evening. This is Kevin Burrow with Kanothi Bruce Architects. Thank you very much for your time this evening. The project we have before you is the redevelopment of these 3 block buildings in the 400 block of State Street, immediately adjacent to Lisa Link Peace Park, as you can see in the slide in front of you. It's a unique property in essence that it butts up to the park on 2 sides of the property line. If you go to the next slide, please. What we are proposing is a new mixed-use building that will be 4 stories tall along State Street and does step up with 2 additional stories. It is 1 additional floor of apartments that actually has a loft within that apartment. So the 5th floor has lofting bedrooms above it as well. We are developing the roof plaza area above the 4th floor at the 5th floor walkout level for all residents to be able to access this outdoor amenity space. And then that 1 large apartment on the 5th floor does have its own private patio as well. We do intend to introduce green roof elements, and we are just doing minimal mechanical placement on here with regards to condensing units. So no large mechanical equipment will be located on this roof, but just vegetation and outdoor amenity space. And also full landscaping along the base of the building, along Lisa Link Peace Park as well. You go to the next slide, please. Here are the floor plans. What you see on the right-hand side are the 2 commercial levels, the lower level and the first floor level, which takes up most of the floor plate with this commercial space. We're utilizing the basement for bike parking and mechanical needs, and then have the main lobby entrance on the eastern side or the right-hand side of the plan. Then as you go up to 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor, it's a mixture of 1 bedroom and studio apartments. And then once you get up to the 5th floor plan, as I mentioned, you've got that large outdoor plaza area, and that is a 5-bedroom unit that occupies 5th and a lofted portion above that. So we have utilized the space as best as possible and are stepping in the building as required, 30 feet along State Street, and then even the lofted area has been stepped in on all sides to minimize its appearance. If you go to the next slide, please. We have several renderings here. This is a view looking up State Street. As you can see, you can just barely get a glimpse of that uppermost story, but it is a very elegant building that has been designed in collaboration with Urban Design Commission. We've refined the exterior material palette down to just a couple of basic materials, and we do intend to use a modular sized brick per the recommendation and have done a high level of detailing on the masonry. You go to the next slide, please. You can see the front view here. Basically, this is a cohesive design along State Street. Next slide, please. Here's another view looking straight on. Again, you can barely get a glimpse of that stepped back area, but all the commercial spaces on 1st floor. Next slide, please. And here's a view where further down State Street, you do get a glimpse of that uppermost lofted area. Next slide, please. Here's a view across the street from Lisa Link Peace Park. And again, you can just barely see that upper level, but we have added numerous windows here, lots of windows and views to the park. And the final slide.
Thank you, Kevin. That concludes your available time.
All right, thank you.
Our next registrant is Kurt Steggy, Cambridge Road, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak, representing the Madison Trust for Historic Preservation. Kurt, you have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I wasn't sure I was on. I'm co-chair of the Advocacy Committee for the Madison Trust for Historic Preservation and was a member of the steering committee for this project that convened in March of 2022. It was apparent to me then that key perspectives were missing from the design materials offered by the applicant. So I, and later the committee chair, asked the applicant's design firm to prepare additional perspectives for the committee's consideration. One is being shown to you now. Each time this proposal was reviewed by the Urban Design Commission, the UDC was presented with a slightly different design. The perspective you are seeing here was from last year. However, there is no appreciable difference between the silhouette of this design and the silhouette of the final design. The perspective that you are seeing now places a lot of blue sky directly in front of the 5th and 6th stories of the representation, serving as camouflage for its top 20 feet. If this trick could be applied to a real building, instead of just a drawing, the inventor would have a very valuable patent. In contrast to the 6-story building being proposed here, the other side of the Peace Park is bounded by the downtown Madison Visitor Center at only a single story. This perspective is from the north side of the north side of the 400 block. If you looked at the south side, I believe the tallest building you'd see would be 3 stories. As of now, buses are no longer traversing the 400 block. In fact, this block is a candidate for being pedestrianized as part of a pilot program. There's a canyon effect for a pedestrian on a narrow street with 6-story buildings on both sides. My understanding is that the applicant for this project also owns considerable property on the other side of the block. If this project is approved, it wouldn't be a big stretch to think of 6 stories on both sides of this block. The Urban Design Commission met 5 different times to consider this application, 3 in 2022 and twice this year. The only vote to offer an advisory recommendation for approval to the Plan Commission was hardly overwhelming at just 5-3. Our downtown urban design guidelines expressly incorporate Madison's downtown plan, which offers the following reference to State Street. Quote, "It is essential that both the scale and rhythm of the buildings and the diversity of uses be retained. The proposal before you fails to maintain the scale, rhythm, and diversity of uses on State Street. I understand that the facade grants are available to State Street property owners to maintain and rehab building facades. Thank you."
Thank you, Kurt. Our next registrant is Lynn Bjorkman, West Lawn Avenue, Madison, opposed, wishing to speak, representing the Madison Trust for Historic Preservation. Lynn, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Last year, our Board of Trustees voted to oppose the demolition of the 3 buildings at 428 to 444 State Street and oppose the design of the building put forth to replace them. Since then, changes have been made in the design of the new building. However, we continue to oppose the project application. We believe that the demolition of the 3 historic buildings conflicts with the purposes of the city zoning code regulating demolition permits. The first stated purpose of the relevant section of the code is to ensure the preservation of historic buildings, unquote. We urge the Commission to strongly consider the Landmark Commission's finding that the buildings all have historic value. Dating from the 1880s onward, the buildings represent styles, building types, and materials that cannot be replaced. Their continuing presence helps tell a more complete story of the development and economic history along Madison's Premier Street. Another purpose of the demolition regulations is to aid in the implementation of other adopted city plans, unquote. Here, that objective applies to the city's 2012 downtown plan. We believe that the proposed project conflicts with several recommendations in that plan. The plan encourages the preservation, rehabilitation, and adaptive reuse of sound older buildings, unquote, and attributes the street's vibrant character to the rich visual pattern of individual small-scale building storefronts and facades. The plan recommends maintaining the 2 to 4 story building height that creates a sense of enclosure while also providing openness and access to sunlight, unquote. These recommendations are even more important today. New multi-story, multi-unit buildings now loom just off State Street, though not necessarily affordable, I might add. These buildings provide needed housing, but they have also caused the loss of the area's historic fabric, resulting in a denser, less human-scaled, and less diverse urban environment. Thus, the Madison Trust urges you to deny approval of the demolition of the 400 block of historic buildings based on the Landmark Commission's finding of historic value and the purposes of the city's standards for demolition. And referencing recommendations in the downtown plan, we also oppose the conditional use permit that would replace the 3 individual historic buildings with one 6-story overscaled new building. We ask you to deny approval to ensure that State Street remains one of the city's most important historical and vibrant urban resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. That is the last of our registrants on this item. Are there questions for any of our registrants? Oh, Heather, did you have something?
Just quickly, once again, we did have one other registrant willing to answer questions, and it's Joe McCormick of North Mills Street.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Are there questions of any of our registrants? Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. I have a question that is probably for Joe McCormick, who was just mentioned. I'd like to hear about efforts to preserve these buildings. I know Joe hasn't owned these forever, but for several years at least, and I'd like to hear about their condition, because the photographs in the staff report for landmarks didn't really reveal anything that looked like they were in rough shape. But I'll let you kind of describe why perhaps they might not be salvageable in your opinion.
Hello. This is Joe McCormick. Yeah, I've owned the buildings for a few years now, and we maintain them as well, but the basements leak, and the units themselves are in bad shape. And we could probably put a lot of money into it and make it work out, but this site being on the park right now, the buildings don't overlook the park, don't provide any eyes on the park. I felt that that was important to the neighborhood, and provide new housing and quite a bit more new housing for downtown. And these buildings, I mean, if you were in them, you could see that they're in terrible condition and have been renovated numerous times over the years. And I could say not very well, but I think this is an elegant building that will be a huge asset to State Street. It's a huge risk on my part,
Thank you, Joe. Did he answer your question in regard to the state of the buildings?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Did you have any further questions, Commissioner Heck?
Not at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I have a question for Joe as well, and then one for Kevin. I'll start with Joe. Do you have any, given the 2 commercial spaces, I guess first, do you, how do you anticipate kind of the basement commercial space operating? And do you have any prospective tenants for those spaces to activate those retail areas?
No, everything is spec at this point, because I don't anticipate those spaces becoming available for probably at least 2 years.
Okay, thank you. And then I was wondering if Kevin had a few more slides, if he could run through those and specifically talk about, some changes that were made in response to UDC feedback. I'm curious about how you've tried to kind of address questions of, the rhythm of State Street and the human scale.
Kevin?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. If you could bring the slides back up. Yes, thank you very much, Tim. This image was added for our final presentation to the Urban Design Commission. This is a very, very recent photograph of State Street with our building superimposed to the correct scale and proportions. And their concern with our previous designs were in regards to how it may or may not fit the fabric of State Street with the previous designs. When we originally presented a project to them, they had asked us to divide it into three more unique looking facade elements, which we did, but unsuccessfully in the end after their further review of it. So they asked us to come back with a more cohesive design that fit the scale. And they're very sensitive to the height of the building, specifically that 5th and then lofted 6th floor level. So the changes that we made were pushing the building further away from Lisa Link Peace Park. So this facade that you see on the end, which faces west, now has a lot more windows than any of the previous designs. The original design had numerous windows, but that was in hopes that the city parks department would allow us a no build easement to allow windows to be placed close to the property line. They did not want to grant that easement, so we had to push the building back in order to gain additional windows due to fire distance separation to the property line. So it helped bring more eyes and windows onto Lisa Link Peace Park with this design. And then as you can just barely see that uppermost level, you cannot see the 5th or 6th floor level from a great distance away from the building. So with this image, they felt that we have finally been successful in regards to creating a design that fits the fabric of State Street. It has a 4-story element and then steps down to a 3-story in the middle with the step back of that 4th floor in a charcoal gray siding element, and then steps back up again, which does fit the rhythm that they had asked for without having it feel too eclectic or not cohesive in design. And then the ample windows that we're able to add was really the feature that they had asked for the most.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Commissioner Heck.
Thanks for calling on me again. Kevin, since you had those slides up, it'd be good to look at the rear of the building that faces Peace Park.
Yes.
So how big is the setback to the 5th floor, I guess, that we're looking at?
The uppermost floor is setback. I don't have the exact distance in front of me, but in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 feet back. And then that allows us to do a taller parapet at the masonry element to really help visually screen that uppermost. And that's just a lofted level of that 5-bedroom apartment.
So in this perspective, we're not even seeing the 5th floor?
You are seeing the 5th floor. That's in masonry, actually.
Oh, I see it switched to masonry. I got it. Okay.
Yeah, Lisa Link Peace Park is a grade higher in essence than State Street.
Right. And the current buildings are 2 stories along the park. Is that right?
2 to 3, depending upon the parapet lines. But as Joe McCormick had mentioned, there are no windows or any visual eyes on the park, so to speak, to help provide additional security for the park area and really vitalize that area where you can have, more activity being seen.
Okay, thank you. I do have maybe Kevin, you can answer this, but it might be Joe. There's no mention of a management plan in our materials, but I know in the neighborhood meetings that took place, I guess in 2022, I know Joe was amenable to perhaps having a written management plan, because I'm interested to know how access will be controlled on the rooftop, and particularly since the terrace area looks like it goes right up to the edge where people could almost look over to State Street. But perhaps you can describe the distance between the patio edge and the edge of the building. Is there, and how high is a railing? What's it made of? Will people be able to, misbehave, let's say, as they have in some other State Street or downtown student patio areas, throwing things over the side and things? How can that be prevented, and how will access be controlled?
I can speak to the distance of the railing, so to speak, to the front facade. You can barely get a glimpse of the black railing above the gray siding area. That's because we've actually set it back approximately 4 feet, and we have a continuous planter element along the front facade. So you actually cannot lean over or leer or look over straight down to State Street for that specific reason of providing a little bit of security and safety to those people that are on State Street.
Thank you. Maybe Joe can address hours of when people will be allowed out there, and how will they be how will access be controlled?
Yeah, sure. We have a similar situation on a building at 640 North Henry, where there's a deck for essentially the same reason. There was a 30-foot, or I think up there's a 20-foot setback, but we have 2 cameras on that patio, and you do what you can to avoid misbehavior, but you can't always avoid it. But if something does happen, it's recorded. So we won't have a physical guard up there, but they won't be able to look over the railing at the street, and there'll be nice vegetation, and they'll be under camera. I just did want to say one thing. In the previous picture, these perspectives were done probably a couple months ago, and the perspective off of Gilman Street, looking at the back of the building, if you went there today, you would see the Olive building above the roof line, and not the sky. This building is a much smaller scale.
Thanks, Joe. And did you reference about whether or not access will be controlled? Could somebody be out there at bar time, or?
No, we would restrict it to 10 p.m.
And how is access via a fob that would not unlock the door at 10? Is that probably
right? The entire building will be on fobs. There is that unit on the top floor. I don't know how we would restrict that because, but to the rest of the property, it would.
As I recall, that was a private patio that's not connected to the front of the larger public patio. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Those were my questions.
Commissioner McCahill.
Thanks. I've got a question probably for Joe. So the materials note, there won't be any car parking, and tenants won't be eligible for permits. How do you plan to communicate that?
We've got similar properties in the neighborhood with the same restrictions. It's in the lease.
Okay, thanks. And have you had to make any special arrangements for move in and move out?
Well, as everything else, it's a challenge downtown, but I own the driveway leading to the back of the building, so that's as good access as we can provide.
Okay, thanks.
Any further questions? Commissioner Shepherd.
I guess this is for Kevin. Can you talk a bit about if there are any efforts in terms of this project to incorporate elements of the buildings that are proposed for demolition? For example, in the Landmarks Commission report, they talk about, particularly the building was at 444 State Street, that it has historic value based on sort of its context, its design. Were there any efforts to sort of incorporate anything from the existing buildings into the new project, into the new design, as sort of a nod to, that history that's there? Or what did you try that? And if you didn't, why not?
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, we took a look at the existing facades and the existing footprint of the buildings, and it was a challenge to try and get them incorporated, but as UDC was guiding us through different design iterations, we had looked at doing 3 different facade designs for this facility, which would allow us the opportunity to try and take on the character of some of the existing buildings. But as I mentioned previously, they did not feel that that was a successful venture, so they directed us back to a more cohesive design with consistent materials, not a large variety of materials, to have it be incorporated, and then through step backs and just minor changes of the middle facade to have it be more of a successful design.
All right, thank you.
Are there further questions of any of our registrants? Commissioner Solheim.
More question for Kevin. On the front, are those like garage door style that open, or are they just windows?
At the first floor level, we are intending those to be a garage door potential. If, for instance, it would be a restaurant use or a more open retail use to have that opportunity. Should it be just traditional retail that does not want to have that large opening, the doors themselves would be designed to resemble storefront windows as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. My last question. Kevin, along those lines, is the first floor space is now designed as one large space, or are you anticipating having several space possibilities for like different tenants?
We are anticipating potentially having to subdivide this into some smaller tenants. It's currently shown as one larger space, but having those numerous entry opportunities along the facade will allow us to break this down into some smaller tenants, should that be the need for those interested parties.
And I guess an earlier version had a second floor that was also planned for commercial, but that's disappeared and now has apartments, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. We were originally trying to secure a restaurant that might use a mezzanine type seating area, but that has not come to fruition.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Commissioner Shepherd.
I'm sorry, I forgot to ask this earlier, and I'm not sure if you already addressed this at this meeting, but what efforts did you make is it possible to relocate the existing buildings? If not, why not? Thank you.
Sure, I can answer that question. We did consider that. Given the size and scale of the buildings, they are too large to be able to maneuver onto State Street and down State Street. And Lisa Link Peace Park has some gorgeous trees that were planted about 10 to 15 years ago that are oak trees that we have been made crystal clear that cannot be touched, harmed, or moved in any way or fashion. So unfortunately, we don't have a method or pathway to relocate these buildings safely without damage to either the park or adjacent infrastructure on State Street.
Thank you.
Are there further questions of any of our registrants? Seeing no raised hands, I'll close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Commissioner McCahill.
Thank you. As someone who's relatively new to demolition permits, and landmark recommendations, I was wondering if someone could speak to the statement that they're contributing to potential National Register historic districts, and the significance of a potential National Register historic district.
I can try that, and might potentially look to Heather to also backfill on that. But around 1995, there was an effort led that included staff and the preservation community to create a National Register historic district in the State Street area, centered on State Street. Don't have, unfortunately, the exact geography And the sense was that there was a critical mass of historic properties that would have been eligible for designation as a National Register district. However, there was concern raised by property owners in the State Street corridor, and the pursuit of that National Register district did not raise to the level of actual designation with the Department of Interior. So it's, I guess I would characterize it as a footnote of history, no pun intended, that, over 25 years ago now, there was an effort that, a lot of the basic ingredients for a National Register district were there, but there was not the will to create that district. And an important note, the National Register district is the one that makes properties eligible for assistance if renovation is sought. It's not a local district, which has a much more regulatory component in terms of exterior alterations, how additions or new construction are handled by the Landmarks Commission. So it would have been the more honorary district that has the benefits of potentially allowing assistance for certain activities in the corridor.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. Let's see if I can articulate my question correctly. I was, thinking about there's a fair amount of situations where we will send something, approve it, but send it back to UDC for final approval or for a couple of items. In this case, UDC is advisory, and my sense is they have, although it was close, signed off on this design specifically, so it would not be appropriate to send it back to them unless maybe we had something very specific to consider. I'm just trying to get a kind of lay of the land for options here.
You are correct that UDC regarding new construction in the downtown core district is advisory to the Plan Commission as the Plan Commission considers whether or not the conditional use standards are met. I think if the Plan Commission was concerned about the design to the extent that it did not feel it could approve the conditional use requests as it pertains to Standard 9 in particular, which has to do with the effectively the design of the project or the design of the conditional use, that it could send something back to the Urban Design Commission with specific direction on what help it would need. So I think that's my initial reaction to that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Tim. That's all I have right now.
Okay, thank you. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you. I am just trying to still wrap my head around the standards and the scope of the demolition code. So what, how are we supposed to balance the input from Landmarks versus, I read the staff report, but I'm unclear on how do we balance that Landmarks observations or feedback versus what is in front of us.
I guess I can start with that one. This is occasionally the challenge that the Plan Commission is faced when considering demolition of existing buildings. Until about a year and a half ago, maybe closer to 2 years ago, the consideration of the proposed use was equal or near equal to the consideration of what was being demolished. And we were advised after a couple of contentious demolitions in 2020 and early 2021 that we needed to change the demolition permit standards to only focus on the existing building and only the existing building. So we no longer, Hepker Road, which was on the consent agenda earlier this evening, is a great example of demolition permits in the wake of that direction by the city attorney's office and subsequent change to the zoning code to only focus on what's there, not what's proposed. There was no discussion on Hepker Road of what's going to replace the single family residence that the Plan Commission ultimately found the standards met and approved the demolition of. And that's effectively what is before you with item number 11, sort of putting blinders on and only focusing on the three buildings at 428, 434, and 444 that are proposed for demolition, and considering the significance of what's there, not the significance of what's proposed to follow it. Giving consideration to any plan guidance that you have, giving significant weight to what the Landmarks Commission says in terms of the historic value of the buildings, and again noting that they felt pretty strongly about the 19th century buildings at 428 and 434, but also felt that the new kid on the block that's only 61 years old at 444 also contributed to the character of State Street, kind of gave that one their middle of the road recommendation, significant value to a degree, but not as significant as the other two buildings. And also, so yeah, I guess I'll stop there and see if I'm getting anywhere close to an answer, or maybe just creating more confusion.
Heather, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Not necessarily. I guess I'll just say that this can be a challenging situation when we're focused on just the buildings themselves, not really looking at what's coming in the future, and taking into account the new demolition standards. But I think in this case, the Plan Commission recently, prior to several new members on the commission today, has grappled with a few cases similar to this, where the Landmarks Commission had recommended, that the Plan Commission find that the buildings, do have historic significance. The Plan Commission was really just able to weigh the proposals, the proposal for demolition, and still find that the standards were met in one of those cases. In another case, the Plan Commission referred the project or actually denied the project in its current form. And then the project came back a few months later with some revisions that incorporated maybe more of the existing building into the proposal. Now, I think in this case, the opportunities to do that aren't as great, frankly. The opportunities to incorporate aspects of the existing buildings in what's proposed aren't as great. And you can't help but see what's proposed as plan commissioners. We as staff can't help to see what's proposed and give that some thought. So I don't blame you if you're also thinking about a little bit about the building that's being proposed. But when you make your decision on the demolition, it's really important to focus on the demolition standards, and yes, take into account the Landmarks Commission's recommendation, but you should do so thinking that, if these buildings were to come down, anything consistent with the downtown plan and anything, consistent with the zoning on the site could be constructed in the coming years. Try to sort of not think about just the proposed new use as the definitive replacement for those buildings.
Thank you, Heather and Tim. Did you have anything further, Alder Figueroa Cole?
No, thank you.
No, thank you. Commissioner Shepherd.
Yeah, if I can just ask Tim to comment on the condition of the existing buildings. As someone mentioned earlier, I think it was also mentioned in the staff report, we have photos, but there was never structural analysis of the building and that sort. If you can just comment on that, is that usual, or If you
It's
could just
in-
comment on that.
Sure. It's encouraged, but it's not required.
Okay.
For a demolition permit, we have for, I would say maybe 50, no more than 60% of the demolition permits that the Plan Commission sees, there might be some language in the letter of intent. There could be a supporting document prepared by a structural engineer or an architect that specializes in historic preservation. That additional information on the condition of the building, physical conditions, looking back through alterations. We did not get that here. I think it would be within the Plan Commission's authority to ask the applicant to provide that information if they were so inclined. But I will also point out that we get a fair number of applications where we don't get much more than photos for those demolitions.
Thank you.
Are there further questions of staff? Commissioner McCahill.
I mute tag here. Thank you. I was also struggling with this question and trying to, weigh, as it says, the interest of health, prosperity, safety, and welfare of people in this decision. So I was gleaning what I could from the pictures, and Commissioner Heck asked about the condition earlier. Is there anything else that you can add as staff, just in terms of like how many units there are, just so we understand like how this building is contributing to society?
Sure, I have that. I've got 2 apartments in 444. Sorry, I've got to pull a couple of separate PDFs open to get all that information. I've got 1, according to the city assessor, in 428. And at 434, I've got 2 more. So a total of 5 apartments between the 3 buildings.
Thank you.
Are there further questions of staff? Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I guess I'm guessing you don't have this information, but following that same line of thought, a big part of the plan recommendations or focus for State Street is, activation of the street, having a lively environment, and certainly a big part of that is the retail space. Have you received any information about, obviously I think a lot, if not all of that, has been vacant for a while in anticipation of this proposal, but any information on usefulness of that space and its ability to continue acting as retail space?
I don't have any information, and I wouldn't want to conjecture.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean,
Okay.
you heard Mr. McCormick's comments about where he feels the
Mhm.
buildings are. I don't have anything that I could add or contradict.
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
Are there further questions of staff? Seeing no raised hands, I'm looking for a motion. Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. Given that we need to make separate motions for these items, I'll make a motion with regard to the first one, the demolition application. I'll move that the standards of approval for the demolition application are not met, particularly number 7, the standard of approval number 7, with regard to the proposed demolition being consistent with the statement of purpose of this section. I do not find that it is. And also, I would reference the statement of purpose itself. I don't know if this is more like explanation than a long motion. Maybe I should hold off until I get a second.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Shepard. Commissioner Heck, do you wish to speak to your motion?
I will. So, as I mentioned, standard of approval number 7 for demolitions says that the demolition should be consistent with the statement of purpose of this section. And the statement of purpose of the section includes this language. The purpose of this section is therefore to ensure the preservation of historic buildings, encourage applicants to strongly consider relocating rather than demolishing existing buildings, comma, aid in the implementation of adopted city plans, etc. I'm mostly focusing on the preservation of the historic building, as well as the implementation of adopted city plans. And I think some of you may have seen in the public comment the references to the downtown plan, which is an adopted city plan. And in that plan, on page 45, under State Street recommendations for that State Street neighborhood, recommendation 75 is encourage the preservation, rehabilitation, and adaptive reuse of sound older buildings that contribute to the district's character. So that, in my mind, lays out the actual motion and the underpinnings of the motion. I also feel pretty strongly about what we heard from, I guess, maybe Kurt Stege, that I think or someone from the Madison Trust, maybe even in written comment, that this is kind of the only intact block along State Street still that has so many historic facades of very similar scales and heights. There are mostly 2-story buildings, a few 3-story and a few 1-story along this stretch of State Street. And I feel like, that establishing the precedent of demolishing these structures that are judged by landmarks to be historically important is a precedent that I don't want to set, because I feel like it could be a domino effect, and that these traditional State Street facades and heights will be greatly endangered if we do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there other comments, statements the commissioners want to make about the motion? Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Heck, for making the motion. I've been leaning that same way, but really struggling with this one. I'm having a hard time getting past the same section of the demolition standards, especially without any additional information that would warrant, demolition of the buildings regarding condition, future use. Without really some strong information on that, I just don't feel like we have enough to go on to approve this as is.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other comments or input? Commissioner McCahill.
Thanks. As folks maybe could tell from my questioning, I'm conflicted also. One could also point to the comprehensive plan, which encourages intense development downtown and in transit areas. And even without considering what could go in the place of this building, it is not intense development. So I think that's a counter argument. But I think probably Commissioner Heck's case is stronger, I think.
Any further comments before we come to a vote? Alder Figueroa Cole.
Yeah, I am also conflicted on this one. I mean, if I'm supposed to be focusing on these three buildings right now, then it confuses me to then support a motion that is based on what we think will be a domino effect for the future of State Street. So I don't know. I'm kind of like with Chris or Commissioner McHale there, like this is promoting part of the plan for State Street. And I can also say I can throw the same thing from the landmark part of it. Like, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, these are not a national protected. So I don't know. I'm struggling here a little bit with the language of the on how to apply the language of the code on this one. So I don't know if anyone can put any more clarity or make a statement, additional statements that can help me make my decision. Maybe Commissioner Mendez can help.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Mendez.
Thank you, Chair. I would support Commissioner Heck on this one. I believe Standard 7, the demolition statement of purpose doesn't meet that in its intent. I think the developer tried. They looked at moving it, but they haven't really spoke to or looked at any of the other options with the current buildings. Reuse them, demolish and reuse the materials, any of that type of thing that we've heard from others in the past. So I think that, to me, that leads me towards agreeing with this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one thought. Well, two thoughts, I guess. First, this was a tough decision for me too. This was in my Alder district until redistricting, and so I've worked with the neighborhood and the development team for quite a while. It was a tough for me to make that motion, actually, but I do believe in it. Second, I think this differs from some of the other recent demolition applications that have come our way because, yes, these buildings are historic landmarks, gave them their red light recommendation, that they're important buildings, 2 of the 3, and the other is kind of a middling recommendation, still worth note. But it's about context. I think that this isn't, let's say, like the Filene House on Sherman Avenue, where it's a standalone building that we're judging based on just what the building is. These buildings are important because of their context. They sit within a non-designated historic district, I'll call it that. We all think of State Street as a particular thing, and it's been beloved and maligned for many decades. But I think I don't think want to destroy the context of State Street. So it's a little bit different than just a standalone building consideration, even though I think that's a large part of what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you. So I have 2 questions. What does it mean not to approve this? Does the developer gets to come back with changes, or does it mean that this project is not a go? And with the context of creating a domino effect, does that mean that we will never allow a new development on State Street unless it's the building is falling apart and is a hazard to the public? Someone can answer that. I don't know who that will be.
I'll try the first one, and then I'll weigh as I do how to react to the second one. But I would ask Commission Member Heck to clarify if this is a place on file without prejudice, which could allow the demolition question and presumably the other 2 questions related thereto to come back sooner. If the request is to deny, that has the practical effect of putting the demolition on ice for a period of a year, because I would qualify that by saying that, and and maybe this is the partial answer to the second question as well, that we've heard conversation and questions by the commission tonight about the condition of the buildings, perhaps not having adequate information on hand this evening to find that the standards could be met. And I'm not saying that they would be met with more information, but certainly the absence of information on the condition of the buildings may have aided in the motion that's before the body right now. So additional information would be needed before the demolition question could come back. But I mean, from a basic, what the proposal is on number 11, it's to take down the 3 buildings. So something, if this is denied or placed on file with prejudice, that would suggest that the question to raise these same 3 buildings within 1 year of the Plan Commission's decision would be potentially out of bounds, versus a place on file without prejudice, which would at least allow the applicant to put the question back before the body as a new application, and potentially an application that would have additional information with it that might assist the Plan Commission in its discussion in the future.
Commissioner Heck.
I don't want to interrupt Alder Figueroa Cole. Okay. I will clarify my motion. While I don't believe there's any information forthcoming that will provide much more information, I am willing to make my motion to place on file without prejudice, because I think there are enough commissioners that are kind of wanting to understand the logic of this and how it flows. So I'm willing to make my motion be without prejudice.
Thank you for that clarification.
Are there further discussion points on this motion? Further observations? Yes, Commissioner Shepherd.
So just to be clear, do we need to state exactly the reasons for, if this is being placed on file, the reason for it being placed on file, and what information we may want to reconsider this in the future? I just want to make sure if we have to state A, B, and C, what we need to do.
Heather?
I think the motion, the mover stated that it was the failure to meet standard 7 for demolitions. And if it's being placed on file without prejudice, you need not specify what you would need to know in order for it to come back. That's really pertinent if you're referring to a future meeting. Then you want to have an assignment, some homework, or something that you're expecting as a commission to see the next time. In this case, you're placing it on file without prejudice, and that doesn't mean that it's definitely going to come back. It may be allowed to come back before you.
Thank you, Heather. Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. I am going to ask Heather and Tim, given that the demolition was not approved, do we have to consider 12 and 13 since obviously, yeah, Tim?
Yeah, I think the best course of action would be to, because the conditional use request is premised on a new building, replacing the 3 buildings that did not get approved for demolition. So Yeah, placing on file without prejudice. Or, I mean, if you'd rather, you can also put the conditional use in indefinite referral, which has the practical effect of sending it off of your docket in perpetuity. And then we could bring it back if we needed to clarify what to do with, because technically, if you're going to place the conditional use on file, you have to find that the conditional use standards aren't met. And I don't recall if this question has come up before. Maybe it did with the Dayton Street Hotel the first time that demolition didn't pass. Maybe I would ask Heather to chime in on that, but
the indefinite referral sounds like it fits the bill in this particular one. So Heather's nodding yes. Okay, then we would be moving on to agenda item 12, Legistar 69792. Is there a motion? Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. Since I started this, I'll see if I can complete it. I am looking for the agenda. Okay, I'll move that the consideration of a conditional use at 428 to 444 State Street be indefinitely referred.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Heck? No. Any comments? Seeing none, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. And finally, agenda item 13 on this item, Legistar 69800, about the certified survey map. Tim.
This is a fun one. We might touch all the bases here. But there wouldn't be necessarily anything in the subdivision regulations or the zoning code that would preclude the Plan Commission from not approving the one lot CSM. Now, it's probably fair to say that the applicant may not want to pursue any approval that the Plan Commission might want to give, but the three buildings can be on one lot. From a code perspective, I'm not aware of anything that might preclude that. And I seem to recall prior to a CSM that was done around 2014 that at least a couple of these buildings used to share the same parcel before the previous owner, working with the city, got the individual buildings placed on individual lots during a CSM where we also clarified the boundary with that previous owner and Lisa Link Peace Park. So it may amount to nothing, but it might be okay to approve the one lot CSM because again, the Plan Commission would have to find that the whatever standards or criteria in the existing subdivision regulations are not met, and referral off the docket is not an option because a certified survey map is entitled to approval within 90 days. Either we have to approve, conditionally approve, or reject with cause any CSM past 90 days, and we are well past 90 days. This has been kind of strung along as the demo and the conditional uses, particularly the plans for the conditional use, have plotted along these last 18 months.
Thank you, Tim. Do we have a motion? Commissioner Mendez.
I have a question. Can we or should we ask the applicant if they would like us to continue with this? Or if they would like to pull it? Or if we approve it and they don't want us to, I think that with this project, I just want to know what options we have.
We could, I suppose, reopen the public hearing. I'm not sure that makes a whole lot of sense with this. Because it doesn't really hurt anything to go ahead and act on this. I will again turn to Tim Parks and Heather. Heather, please go ahead.
Oh, I think I was going to say something really similar. Approval of the certified survey map does not mean that they have to move forward and record the certified survey map and act on it and combine those properties. It gives them a path forward to do that. So I think exactly like Chair Zellers said, it's really not putting them in a bind to approve it.
Okay.
And it doesn't undo the decision on the demolition permit request or the indefinite referral of the conditional uses.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Mendez? Okay. Thank you. Alder Heck.
One more question on that subject, if I may. This CSM would then go to council. And so there would be an opportunity for the applicant to withdraw after Plan Commission approval and before council. Isn't that correct?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I'll go back to my question. We need a motion. Commissioner Mendez.
Thank you. I move that the Plan Commission approve Legistar 69800, approving a certified survey map of the property at 428 to 444 State Street.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Commissioner Mendez, did you wish to speak to your motion? No. Okay, thank you. Any comments on this? Seeing no raised hands, we'll go to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to agenda items 14 and 15, which are related, and we will consider those as one public hearing. And then after the public hearing, we will make separate findings and motions on each agenda item. So agenda item 14, Legistar 77932, located at 4687 Verona Road, 10th Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a restaurant. And agenda item 15, Legistar 77933, same location, consideration of a conditional use in the commercial center district for a vehicle access, sales, and service window to allow construction of a new one-story restaurant with a vehicle access, sales, and service window. I will open the public hearing. First, I'll ask, is there any plan commissioner who wants any kind of presentation on this? Seeing no raised hands, I will open the public hearing. And Heather, you indicated that there is a registrant. I don't have that on my information.
Yes, one registered speaker, Miriam Maldonado of Red Arrow Trail, neither supporting nor opposing, wishing to speak. And then 3 registrants that are available for questions. And Chair Zellers, I think you have those.
Yes.
3. Okay, great.
So speaker has 3 minutes.
Chair, that speaker is not currently in attendance. I noticed that Miriam was in the meeting earlier, but not currently.
Okay. Thank you, Jesse. Joe Kirchner, West Main Street, Lena, Illinois, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Joe Kakonoto, from Jory Boulevard, Oak Brook, Illinois, support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. And Kevin Wayner, King James Way, Madison, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Are there questions of any of our registrants? Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Is it appropriate for me to ask the question that the person who registered had? I just couldn't answer it for her.
Is this a question of that will be of staff?
I'm not sure. she just wanted to understand if there was a plan in regards to traffic obstruction during the
Okay,
demolition. So I don't know
yeah.
if that's for the developer or, for the whoever's doing the demolition or for staff, to be honest.
None of the registrants indicate that they're representing to the developer.
Perfect. So then it will be a staff, so then I don't have any questions.
Okay. I will then close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Alder Figueroa call.
Thank you. So, one of the questions, I tried to find this on the staff's report, is the plan to manage the traffic on that area. The question is coming from the business across the street from the Luna's grocery store. Can someone please, elaborate on that?
Sure, I can do my best. One of the major changes involved in this fairly simple replacement of the one-story building with a new one-story building and drive-through is that one of the access drives from the Verona Road frontage road will be removed, and it will have 2 access points from Red Arrow. And so vehicles will go in from Red Arrow and then out back onto Red Arrow. So they will no longer have access directly to the Verona Road frontage. And then another detail is that they will have they've proposed a 2-lane drive-through. And so that can assist with queuing in order to basically accommodate 2 separate lanes of vehicles at one time. And then finally, I'll just note that our traffic engineering staff did not have any unique conditions or stated concerns with the layout that's proposed for the new site.
Thank you, Heather. I think based on the text message that she sent, she's not concerned about the design that they're proposing. She's concerned more about the traffic management during demolition. During the process of, from August to, I think, November or something was proposed in there that this will take place.
Okay. That I don't have information to share on their proposed demolition staging or construction traffic for demolition, but I will say that right now the site is nearly 1 acre in size. The site itself is about 10 times as large as the existing building on the site. And so my thought is that much of the equipment and not necessarily the traffic getting to and from the site, but the actual equipment itself can likely be accommodated on that property.
Okay. I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any further questions of staff? Seeing no raised hands, we would need a motion on agenda item 14. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Oh, let me give this a try. So I will move to approval the agenda item 779932 for 4687 Verona Road, consideration of the demolition permit to demolish a restaurant.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Alder Figueroa Cole, did you wish to speak to your motion?
No, thank you.
Okay. Are there any comments, input on the motion? Commissioner Mendez.
Yeah, I would just like to note that I don't know if we need to add it in here, but all the standards I believe are met for this. I would support this.
Thank you. That is a good thing to add. So, anything else? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Moving on to agenda item 15, Legistar 77933. Do we have a motion? Alder Figueroa Cole.
Yeah, I'll take another stab at this. So move to approve based on the standards of demolition being met, that
We're on the conditional use.
Oh, I'm sorry, for the conditional, all the standards have been met for the conditional use to move to approve 77933 4687 Verona Road, the consideration of a conditional use in the commercial center district on the conditional center district for a vehicle access, sales and service window to allow construction of a new one-story restaurant with a vehicle access, sales and service window.
Is there a second? Seconded by Alder Duncan. Alder Figueroa Cole, did you wish to speak to your motion? No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, any input on this motion? Seeing none, we'll come to a vote and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is subdivision regulations. Agenda item 19, Legistar 78130, repealing and recreating section 16.23 of the Madison General Ordinances to update land subdivision regulations. First, we will hear from Tim Parks.
Chair, I noticed that Alder Duncan has his hand raised.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Alder Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to ask for a motion to recess for 5 minutes.
Okay, I will consider that motion, seconded by Alder Figueroa Cole, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, we will recess until 7:40. So I will see you back here then. Thank you. Okay, we have a quorum present. I will call the Plan Commission meeting back to order, and we will hear from Tim Parks about agenda item 19. Tim.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members of the commission. I will note that the subdivision regulations are back before the Plan Commission. The members will recall that we had the initial discussion of proposed amendments to section 16.23 of Madison General Ordinances regarding the subdivision of land 2 weeks ago. Heard public comment and had brief discussion before referring it. We are back again tonight. The ordinance that's before you is the same ordinance that was before the body 2 weeks ago. However, in the meantime, we've gotten more information about the Transportation Commission's review of the ordinance amendments on June 7th, where they recommended adoption of the ordinance as submitted. Last Wednesday at the Board of Public Works, on a 3-to-1 vote, the Board of Public Works recommended adoption of the subdivision regulation amendments, with members of the Board of Public Works noting that the introduction and purpose section, parent 1, should include language encouraging use of distributed green infrastructure, protection of the lakes, preservation of tree canopies, use of creative approaches to managing stormwater, and accommodating urban agriculture. And also, a member of the Board of Public Works had expressed interest in the ordinance being reviewed by the Food Policy Council and Sustainable Madison Committee. I will also note that Department of Transportation Director Tom Lynch is with us once again, and he has an excellent overview of the Complete Green Streets policy and guide that he is ready on a moment's notice or a simple request by the Commission to provide an overview of. So with that, I'll leave my comments there and be available for any questions that the Commission has as we proceed.
So my question of commissioners before we go to the public hearing, would you like to have an overview of Complete Green Streets? I see one yes, so let's do it then. Tom, could you give us your overview, please?
Yes, I'll try and make it concise. Let me get to the right. Here we go. And I'll. Okay, background. Did you all see my slide change?
Yes.
Okay, so sometimes that doesn't work, so I just wanted to make sure.
It does.
So the Complete Green Streets Guide was adopted by Council on January 3rd, 2023. It provided the official city policy on existing streets. That resolution directed staff to revise applicable ordinances. Much of that was within MGO 3556, which gave powers and defined duties of the Transportation Commission and the Board of Public Works. But it also directed us to revise MGO 1623, which was a subdivision ordinance. That was a little bit heavier lift, and because it was a heavier lift, it's why it's before you today in June rather than in January. The resolution also directed staff to review the guide with the Transportation Commission and Board of Public Works after about one construction cycle, about 18 months from the adoption. Some of the background that resulted to this, the previous policies, practices, and ordinances have moved us to wider streets. Residents living on streets and new subdivisions request street improvements to improve street safety. An example would be kind of a residential street to the right, which is North Star. It's 48 feet wide, 48 feet wide. And it's consistent with our current subdivision ordinance. Whereas over on the left, we have Rutledge Street, which is just 28 feet wide. We found that the narrower streets reduce traffic speeds, reduce diversion, and lead to fewer complaints. Streets that are on the right are almost broken the moment they're opened up because they just promote speed. What's unfortunate is that these neighborhoods, when we try and implement speed measures in the Safe Streets Madison prioritization process, these neighborhoods don't score high for a variety of reasons: crash history, high injury network, and the like. So residents basically are have to live with a street that was designed for cars to move fast, and they don't have many alternatives or remediation alternatives because they're pretty far down on the Safe Streets Madison list, which has right now over 500 requests. Some of the hold on, I'm going to move. We'd like to build better streets with, let's say, complete green streets. We want to have right-side streets that are not overbuilt. Streets should be designed for today's needs, with additional right-of-way reserved for future needs. We'd like our streets to be people-focused rather than car-focused. We want to make sure that residents are safe when they walk along and across. And then we'd also like green infrastructure that supports a resilient city and helps our right-of-way become both sustainable and a welcoming place. And really, this is all a balancing act to try and get all of these in sync with each other. And the Complete Green Streets policy seeks to do that. Here you can see Complete Green Streets implementation. Projects that are on existing streets, the Transportation Commission and then Board of Public Works, when it goes out to bid, can really implement Complete Green Streets. In fact, I'm going to say that the thought process behind Complete Green Streets have been integrated into many of the more recent street reconstructions that are in the city. However, new streets require an ordinance change in MGO 1623. An example of this came up on a recent subdivision off of Milwaukee Street and Sprecher Road. This is what the Transportation Commission wanted to approve. They wanted to approve a 28-foot wide street because they knew that this street, once completed, would be attractive as a cut-through street and could be attractive for speeds. Yet the current MGO 1623 would not allow the Transportation Commission to recommend that. It had to be a 32-foot street. And basically the street widths were baked in to the ordinance so that the Transportation Commission could not recommend or require a smaller street more appropriate to this neighborhood. So what is Complete Streets? Key revisions to support the Complete Streets include in the definitions what is the Complete Streets Guide. It's our current guide that was adopted by the Common Council, and it's able to be revised by the Transportation that provides guidance for accommodation of all travel modes, helps allocate the street space, and recommends right-of-way width. The guidance on the tree canopy and distributed green infrastructure revised by the Board of Public Works. Under the design standards, and this is perhaps one of the things that's most important to the Department of Transportation, is that it states that the most current Complete Green Streets Guide shall be used to develop the street type, width, and allocation of space between transportation modes. The tables, the guide should be used to develop typical sections, travel way width, and total right-of-way width. For any subdivision or land division that proposes to deviate from the design standards in the guide, the Plan Commission shall consider the recommendation of the Transportation Commission before taking action on such subdivision or land division. And this is an example of some of the design guides that we have different types of street types and because I wanted to respect your time, I didn't go into an in-depth description of our typology, our modal hierarchy, and the like. But these tables provide flexibility. However, they will tend towards narrower streets and slower streets. Also, as far as public streets, bikeways, and walkways, states that public walkways, bikeways, paths, or sidewalks shall be installed within all public right-of-ways and public easements as required by the most current version of the Complete Streets Guide, unless a variance is granted by the Transportation Commission. The location of public walkways, bikeways, and paths may be modified to protect and preserve significant trees. One thing I did want to to mention, I think the commission has received some comments from stakeholders, and they are actually advocating for the allowing of parking on both sides, particularly for streets that are served, or for housing units that are served by alleys in the back. And I think as staff, we would just encourage the commission to keep the ordinance as it's written. I'll give you an example. To the right, we have, a newly developed street, Golden Maple. It's 32 feet face to face. You can see that the buildings on the left are served by an alley, and what we have is we have a street where parking is not used. It's going to be attractive for speeding. To the left, we have a similar street. Everything on the left is served, and the right, everything on the right is actually served by an alley. It's Buena Vista. It's 24 feet wide. It's actually very difficult to go fast on Buena Vista. It's in a traditional neighborhood. It creates kind of an atmosphere saying that this is a residential area. It's not a cut through. So we would like to just state that we feel like the ability to restrict parking to one side on all types of development just provides one more tool for the Transportation Commission as they try and figure out the right street width so that streets are not, let's say, broken from the start. And there's more information on the Complete Green Streets website, and we can provide more information, slideshows going in depth onto the Complete Green Streets Guide. Also, Professor McCahill, who's a commissioner now, was very involved in the development and approval of the Complete Green Streets Guide, and so I'm sure he can also provide context for you. Thank you for allowing me to kind of give that background.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. And I assume you will be available for questions after the public hearing, Tom?
Yes.
Okay. I will open the public hearing. The first registrant is Bill Connors, West Main Street, Madison, neither support nor oppose, wishing to speak, representing Smart Growth Greater Madison. Bill, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I want to touch on what Tom Lynch just mentioned about the parking, allowing to have parking on only one side on streets that are developments that are served by alleys. If you're many of those developments are designed to be somewhat more affordable single-family housing developments. And you frequently would have people who are, say, in the construction trades, would be the kind of people you would expect to be attracted to a development like that, but they can't park their construction vehicle in the garage. They can't park their construction vehicle in the little short driveway between the alley and their garage. And then we're going to limit parking on the street. That really kind of defeats the purpose of some of those developments. So I would urge the Plan Commission to consider the people who know what works and doesn't work in developing residential subdivisions are the folks who develop residential subdivisions, and that Mr. Lynch really doesn't know much about that. So I would appreciate your consideration on that issue. We raised a number of issues having to do with alleys, with being able to get the decisions made early enough in the process of the subdivision process. And I appreciate it if you would look at items 1 through 5 raised in our email. And regarding number 6, I want to take a moment to talk about that. The Hawthorne Truax plan recently approved by the council essentially welcomes much more dense development along East Washington Avenue, relatively near to the airport. And it would be very unfortunate if the subdivision ordinance were to contain a provision that says you can't obtain a approval of a certified survey map to combine parcels along East Washington Avenue into a redevelopment site because it's too near the airport and too near noise. So we would very much appreciate if the Plan Commission would take time on this issue and obtain clarification, have clarifying language added that a CSM to combine properties into a redevelopment site shouldn't be subject to the language about airport noise. And certainly we shouldn't have a language added to the proposal to go the other way to make clear that a CSM.
Thank you,
is
Bill.
subject.
That concludes your available time. We have one other registrant, Ann Kovich, Golden Gateway, Madison, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. And Ann does chair the Transportation Commission. So in terms of some context about that, Ann would be a good person to ask. So are there questions for either of our registrants? Questions for either of our registrants? Seeing none, are there questions of staff, or is there further information that you would like to hear from staff about? We do have also Renee Holloway here who can also respond to questions. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe Renee can answer this, I don't know, or Tom. In the current Safe Streets program that the council passed, does it specify the kind of trees that we are trying to protect other than canopies? Like in specifically, do we go into the discussion about trees to have a conditional cultural historical importance?
Renee's here. You might be able to assist with that, Renee.
Yeah, sure. So we don't go into that level of detail. It is more about more about size of tree, types, not necessarily that kind of detailed language on the preservation of specific trees.
So I have a question about that, but before I ask that, so when it comes to sizes, does it cover? I mean, there's a suggestion to change this as part of a group of 8 or more trees, 12 inches in diameter or greater, and that form a continuous canopy. Does that aligns with the State Streets recommendations?
I wouldn't say, I think it's not out of line with them. We don't have kind of that level of detail. And I don't know if Tim, you have any more history on kind of how the tree part in the ordinance, the subdivision ordinance came about?
Yeah, that actually came about or was informed by some subdivision reviews that the Plan Commission has done over the last 15 or so years, predating Complete Green Streets, where we conditioned approval on a subdivision on preserving trees. We can think of a few different ways where we've done that. In one instance, there was an area that was mostly going to be acquired for parkland by the city, and that was a factor. Tree information, tree preservation was a factor in what was ultimately decided to be accepted for public parkland. In another instance, I can think of a subdivision layout that was informed, maybe not directed, by a very significant tree over on the far west side off of Old Shave Road, where it used to kind of zigzag between Elderberry Road and Old Sauk Road, right at one of the perilous 90-degree corners that used to follow a quarter section line. There is a majestic oak tree. I think it's an oak tree. And we worked with the subdivider in that case, which was Viridian Homes, to kind of get that alignment figured out just right so that we could preserve that tree. But that was kind of done outside of the Plan Commission, not specifically with the Plan Commission condition. And then I can recall a subdivision that was ironically formerly a Christmas tree farm, but was surrounded along the perimeters by some really significant oak trees. Cut down all of the evergreens, all gone. But there was a lot of interest in preserving the perimeter vegetation, the mature canopy trees that form the perimeter of that site. And so we did that with the subdivision approval and implementation. We also worked with the subdivider to require the planting of additional trees. So that all predated Complete Green Streets. And in my estimation, most of the trees that we're talking about in Complete Green Streets are going to be new street trees that are going to be planted after the streets are approved, the plats recorded, the streets constructed, everything has been accepted as public. One of the last things we do when that subdivision is completed or that development approval is completed is go in there and plant new trees. It's not very often that we're looking at a new subdivision or land division where we're creating new lots and there are existing trees that we're preserving as part of a street layout. I think the tree preservation language that you're seeing in the subdivision ordinance proposed is predominantly looking at preserving existing trees that are on the site now that we think could be a valuable part of that future development.
Did you have further or follow-up questions, Alder Figueroa Cole?
I do, but I want to formulate them, so I'm going to just take my turn here again in a little bit.
Okay. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I just want to touch on a couple of the questions that Bill Connor sent in. One of them related to the width of alleys and the language about, the final width being subject to like a recommendation from the engineer and fire marshal. Is there, I can see how the widths of that can have a significant impact on planning a plat in particular. Can you describe at what point does that recommendation come into play, or is there a reason that we can't, and as part of Complete Streets, have a set width for an alley?
Yeah. I think there is some. It's not just an alley, but also probably in our yield streets. I think what I believe his comment was regarding yield streets, but maybe
yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So a yield street is not an alley, but depending on the types of buildings being proposed, kind of determines what type of working room the fire marshal needs. sometimes that working room is kind of provided within the street due to no parking zones or driveways. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And sometimes it's not. And so it is kind of a case by case basis, but it's part of the subdivision review process, and we interact with them. So I think it is an iterative process. I think his comment is correct that we have to figure that out early in the process. And I don't think, because everything is case specific, like a subdivision with driveways, where there's intermittent parking, there's room for the fire apparatus. Whereas if there's no driveways, there's not room. Some of it has to do with the height of the buildings being proposed.
Yeah. I would build on Tom's comments. We do have some limited circumstances where we have lots that do not functionally front onto a street, so they front onto a public or private park, for example. In fact, the Plan Commission had one, I want to say maybe at its May 22nd meeting, Acacia Ridge replat number 4, where we had some lots that were going to front onto a private open space and only be accessible from a rear public alley. In that case, because the only access being provided for firefighting purposes was from that public alley at the rear of the single family homes that were otherwise going to be oriented to the park, the fire code requires that alley be 20 feet wide, which is the minimum fire lane width for buildings that would not need aerial apparatus access. So anytime you get into a building, primarily one that is governed by the International Building Code, and you're talking about a height that exceeds 30 feet, basically from the street grade to the highest part of the building. If it's over 30 feet, that has to be a 26-foot wide aerial apparatus lane, so that there's space to accommodate an aerial truck that would raise its ladder with its outriggers out and have the ability for other fire apparatus to maneuver around it. So that would dictate the width of the fronting street. And typically that aerial apparatus has to be provided equivalent to 25% of the exterior walls of the building at a minimum. So there are going to be some additional considerations that go into subdivisions coming forward that have more been passive or in the background in the past when we were looking at street widths, because the street widths that we have in the ordinance now, by and large, provide street widths that meet all of the minimum requirements that the fire department needs. And now with Complete Green Streets, we have the ability to contour those streets to better serve the needs of the neighborhood, but we have to keep the needs of the fire department to provide fire access for those buildings. And based on the anticipated heights of buildings or their access, that will dictate how wide the pavements serving those lots will be, whether it's a fronting street, a backing alley, or both. Because if you can have your fire access in the front, if you're thinking about a subdivision with lots that front onto a street but have access from an alley, the fire department is going to fight the fire in the majority of cases, and it's going to apply its codes and its fire needs to the fronting street. And so the width of the alley does not have to be as wide if that alley is serving lots that are all going to be accessible for the fire department's purposes from the fronting street.
That is an excellent answer. Thank you, Tim and Tom. That was very helpful. That's all I have right now.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other raised hands right now. So while you're thinking, in regard to Bill Connors, he had one question. According to the new ordinance, alleys can no longer be outlots. They must be rights of way dedicated to the public. If this ordinance is enacted, does it mean that all new alleys must be named like streets? Could you comment on that? Or
I I asked Jim Wolf, perhaps Tim, you have a different, I asked Jim Wolf, our city engineers, and currently our alleys are public right of way and they are not named, and Jim Wolf did not feel like we had to start naming alleys.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a better answer than what I got from attempting to get Jeff Kwame on the phone late this afternoon, which was I didn't get him on the phone, so I didn't get an answer. So I like Tom's answer better. But yes, they are dedicated to the city. They happen to be outlots. They don't have to be outlots as long as they're dedicated and they meet the size requirements. We're fine.
Okay. Are there further questions of staff? Alder Figueroa Cole.
Hands up. Okay, I'm sorry. People muting and unmuting each other here. Okay, so I just want a clarification, Chair. Are we discussing the ordinance as it is, or can we continue to ask questions based on proposals like the one that you proposed and the things that came on email? Is that okay, or?
Yes, we want to make this, as we pass it on, the best that we can make it. So if there are things that that I said in terms of corrections or additions, if there are things that were brought up by the Board of Public Works that we want to endorse, if there are concerns brought up by Bill Connors that we can, it's sometimes hard to address on the fly, but that we can address, then we should do that, because we want to pass it on to the city council in as complete a form as we can and as best as we can. So it's on the table.
Okay, perfect. So I have a couple more questions then. I mean, and I had asked this already, but I just want to kind of get the feeling of the rest of the commissioners. So there was a section on the code that read restrictions limiting future owners from impacting the mature trees without the approval of, and it continues. And I asked for clarification of what owners meant in that particular clause. And I wonder if staff is willing to just kind of elaborate again on what owner means when we're talking about restricting them from taking down trees on their property.
Sure. Thank you, Alder. Good question. As it's applied to the instances that I suggested in my comments before, the owner would be the subdivider at first, but ultimately the end owner of the lot or outlot that has the trees that are being preserved by the subdivision approval or through the subdivision approval. So in terms of the condition of approval is going to first apply to whoever is seeking the approval. That's going to be the party that's doing the initial preservation of whatever trees are identified for preservation. We're going to work with the proposed language. We would submit that they would, be locating their utilities or configuring their lots or putting building lines on their plat that would preserve those trees. And then that baton would effectively be passed to whomever the end owner of that lot or those lots or that outlot is going to be after the plat is recorded. We have, in certain circumstances, put that onus, if you will, on the individual, be it a family or property owner, whomever that is, that purchases the lot and their successors. Because one of the subdivisions I can think of where the Plan Commission put restrictions on tree preservation as part of the implementation of the subdivision approval. Those were single-family lots, south of Midtown Road, east of Highway M, far west side, and we're probably I would say in some cases on our third, maybe even our fourth generation of owners, depending on how those lots turn over. But that expectation to preserve those trees would be passed from owner to owner to owner. But initially starting with the initial subdivider who's going to be preparing the lots for sale, either, putting up construction fencing to keep the trees from being damaged during construction, or in the same subdivision, planting some trees after the subdivision was approved, working with them on where their utilities end up so that the utilities don't end up right where the tree root system is, so keeping the utilities out of that preservation or planting area as the case was. So it kind of starts with the initial approval, and then it's supposed to pass down, to the successor owners over time.
So what is the process to enforce something like that in the future, and what prevents us from turning that clause into not just new areas, but then existing areas? So I understand the need to having more trees. So how do we see that enforced? Who enforces it? Do we have a system in place today? Do we have, which agency takes care of that to enforce that people are getting permits and things like that?
What we have done in the past is we have placed notices in our permitting system on the affected lots, so that when either through the subdivision improvement process, like if they have trees that they're supposed to preserve, we'll review the grading plans. We might put something in the developer's agreement that they enter into with the city that enforces that they're going to maintain the areas that are supposed to be preserved during construction. In terms of, the successors, that is a bit of a new frontier because we've been doing this on an ad hoc basis for at least my time with the city, which is approaching 20 years. It was done beforehand, I'm aware, but I can't speak specifically to how it was done. But it was, that future enforcement is not specifically clear because we have not really had language in our ordinances that specifically, say what happens if say the third generation owner of a lot where we did a tree preservation zone with a building setback line goes in there and just decides to cut down the trees. First of all, we would have to be made aware that happened. And as the commission may know, most of the enforcement that the city does of its code of ordinances is based on complaints. And so if somebody doesn't, throw the flag, if you will, we won't really know that somebody did something in an area that they might not have known that they weren't supposed to, or worse, they did know and they did it anyway. So that might be an area, frankly, that could use some tightening up. We do have Section 10, which is violations and remedies. There's some language in the code now, but we have the provisions in Parent 10, which is on page 61 of the comparison ordinance document, that speaks to what should happen if someone violates the provisions of this ordinance. But I think it might be a fair question to ask the city attorney's office how that might apply to something where we're actually now putting a provision in the ordinance, or we're proposing to, that would speak to preservation of trees, but to make sure that we have the right language in the code that if somebody did violate it, that we would have the ability to enforce that.
Thank you. And then the last question at this moment is again that proposal for that states are rare or exceptional by virtue of size, species, condition, cultural, historical importance, and or age. So again, how are we going to determine these kind of classifications as we move along through this through the subdivisions processes? And are we like, what would be the process to maintain that? Are we going to have a log? Are we going to have a some kind of like we do today with buildings, where you have their own system to determine this is a historical preserved site? What will be the maintenance of that, and what the steps will be to ensure that what we put in this ordinance is traceable, trackable, and enforceable?
Well, the upfront questions about who would determine the trees, we have some general ideas when we do neighborhood, or typically follow the planning but precede the subdivision approvals, where most of these discussions are going to take place, where we might already be identifying an area where we might want to avoid intensive disturbance of those trees. Sometimes we do it on site in terms of looking at aerial photography, doing site visits, and saying there are trees on this site. Perhaps it would be good through the development of the property, which we're not trying to preclude. It should be very firmly noted, but trying to preserve especially trees that have value because of their native species. They're in good health. They're in locations, frankly, that won't necessarily preclude the development of the property, but may in fact ultimately be a benefit to the resulting development. And I think it's also, that's an important point to make. I think there has been a considerable change in the attitudes of many, if not most, in the development community, that preserving trees adds value, in some cases a lot of value, to their end development, versus where I think there was a little more of a maverick perspective on that 15 or 20 years ago or longer, where it's like, hey, if I got to preserve those trees, that's more money I have to spend on grading, and the less money I have to spend on earthwork or preserving trees means that I'll get my project online faster. But it actually turns out that you can walk and chew gum at the same time. And so I'm not anticipating that we're going to have unwilling parties here, because we see that tree preservation happening in many cases where it can be done without impacting the development that the subdivider is putting forward, because those trees have value. And in fact, you can save money on grading by avoiding certain areas, or not having to, grade and grub a bunch of trees out of the way, especially trees that could be valuable for the folks that you want to sell those lots or occupy the buildings that you're building on the site. In terms of enforcement, we would, if we had a hypothetical site come in, I think we would try to proactively work with the subdivider to take a look at the information and get information together up front. A couple of cases I can think of, they did that without staff even having to ask. A good example recently for the Plan Commission would be 1600 block of Sherman Avenue, the Filene House redevelopment. A lot of trees adjacent to the Yahara River and the Yahara River Parkway, where they kind of came in armed, if you will, with information on where they were going to try to preserve trees and where they couldn't. Likewise, a subdivision approval far east side, east of Reiner Road, about 4 or so years ago. Significant mature trees on that site, other topographical features as well, wetlands, some Door Creek headwaters, where they came in armed with an extensive tree survey, prepared to explain why they were developing the way they were and what they were proposing would be dedicated for parkland and things of that nature. And then working with landscape architects, which we have some in the planning division. We have some in the parks division. So when we're talking about land that's going to be dedicated for parkland, they'll take a look at that tree information and make an assessment, outside of anything that we might do in planning, and say, yeah, there's a lot of valuable trees here. We agree with most of what this tree survey is calling for. And we're asking for it to be prepared by an arborist or another qualified individual, because arborists cost money, and you might have, working with some combination of a landscape architect on a private consultancy and the civil engineers and whatnot, be able to pull together a good enough plan that, conveys what you are or are not going to do with that subdivision vis-a-vis tree preservation, that we'll kind of know it when we see it. And so that would be, I'd say, procedurally how things would go. I mean, it could rise to the level where the Plan Commission was going to be the one to say, no, we really need to preserve these trees, and this is how we're going to do it through the subdivision approval.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, that was a lot to process there. I have one more question, moving from the trees regarding the meeting for Board of Public Works. So can you please share with the commissioners, I think we had shared already with the commissioners based on Tom's presentation, what is the root cause of changing this ordinance and the urgency that exists because of construction going around under the older rules and building those gigantic wide streets, wasting land, and not being able to impose the Safe Streets program. Can you share with the rest of us, like, how many projects are on the pipeline that we could that we can turn if we get this through the system, to the approval system, as soon as possible?
I don't know that I can give you a specific number. I can say, quite honestly and without equivocation, that there are projects that are looking to use the more performance-based criteria in the Complete Green Streets policy and guide as part of their subdivision approvals. Some have already been through the Plan Commission. One was literally submitted earlier today. I think the disconnect that we have right now is pretty much regardless of what folks want to do, the subdivision ordinance takes precedent over a policy adopted by resolution. So no matter how much we want to implement Complete Green Streets to the greatest extent possible, and no matter how many projects there are that would like to avail themselves of the provisions in Complete Green Streets, they can't. And we've had some situations where, a subdivider has come back to us and said, hey, I really would like to do, this type of street versus the street that the existing subdivision regulations are going to require me to build, which is almost the default when you say you have to dedicate a 66-foot wide street. In most cases, that equals in the subdivision ordinance a 36-foot wide pavement. And it only gets narrower if you want to add bike parking. There's language right now that is, if these following things are located along that street, it has to be that wide, and there's no flexibility. And so I can't put that number there for you, Alder, or members of the commission, but I can tell you rather sincerely that there are projects that would proceed under Complete Green Streets as soon as they had the opportunity to do so. I will also counter that by saying I can recall one project, and there may be others, but certainly one project that has been through this body within the last 6 months that didn't want to have anything to do with Complete Green Streets. And I don't quite know what to do with them other than they get a pass because they were approved before the subdivision regulations got amended, and they don't have to worry about it. They want to do a specific type of street. They feel that one of the existing code streets works best for what they want to build. And so, but that was part of what lent urgency to, we had definitely the group that worked on Complete Green Streets over the last couple of years, really feeling excited about what the council did on January 3rd. And then, trying to, work with subdividers and developers to say, all right, hey, this is what your street's going to look like. And then being basically told, we can't really do that until we change the code. And so that's kind of where we are. That it's not a specific number, but it's definitely something that is out there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Are there further questions of staff? Seeing no raised hands, we want a motion. And I would urge you to think about whether you want to incorporate Board of Public Works recommendations. If you want to incorporate, I did spend a lot of time going through the ordinance, as you could probably tell with some of those edits. If there are any or all of my recommendations that you do want to include, then make it clear which ones are in or not. So that would be the motion that I would be looking for. Alder Figueroa Cole.
I guess I'm going to give this a step. So we jump into discussion. I would like to recommend that we pass the ordinance as recommended by staff, and allows time in order to allow us time to I'm just going to leave it at that. Just we can change it later, but I just want to put it in on the table to pass the motion to pass the ordinance as recommended by staff, and then I speak on that.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Alder Figueroa Cole, did you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I'm going to start from the last question up. The recommendations or requests that were provided from the discussion in Board of Public Works. I understand all the interest on changing every aspect of the ordinance from the beginning to end of it, and really dig deep into making those changes. I think that's great. If someone wants to, dedicate time to it, I understand it's since 1970 or something that it hasn't been changed. So all of that is all good with me, but I want to really kind of center back into the urgency of making the changes because of the need that transportation has into the Safe Street, building roads that are more in accordance with the Safe Street policy. Like that meeting went for a long time, and to just go now and make recommendations to go to all these other committees, we as elders, we can make changes in the future. Let's just get the problem that we're trying to solve right now is to get this Safe Streets incorporated into the policy. That's really what I want to center this on. And if we start now making recommendations to move them into to referrals to other places and re-referral back to committees, I think we're just going to move farther away into additional delays. You guys, so you've seen the pictures that were presented in Tom's presentation, those white streets. After being with council, and I know you guys have been into these processes way longer than I have, but for the past 2 years, I have been a strong advocate for the Safe Street program and Vision Zero. And when I see those pictures or drive through one of those new subdivisions and I see these gigantic streets, I'm like, what are we doing here? It doesn't, I can make sense out of it. It's just such a waste of space. So I think that should be our number one priority. Just get the policy passed. If we want to make any changes, any additional changes for it, let's then put a different resolution later and make the changes that we want to implement. When it comes to the suggestions, and again, so thank you that Chair Liddell just went through it word by word. I so much appreciate all that work. So when it comes to in regards to the trees, again, not as experienced as any of you, but so I'm just going to use my little bit of experience being a board, a parks commissioner. Again, another hat that I never thought I would take. It has given me a huge appreciation for how much Madison cares about their green spaces and how amazing do we have it here with so much parkland. So, and then on top of that, having all these canopy infrastructure in place to make our streets even better. I worry that I feel like I haven't heard anything from staff from the questions that I just had telling us or telling me that we have a problem at this moment with protecting trees. I feel like it sounds like anytime that we had an opportunity to protect a tree that was special or a huge area that parks could go ahead and snatch, we had taken that opportunity to do that. So I feel like, yes, that would be a problem that we need to be addressing. But I haven't heard that we lost all these trees due to a specific development that happened in the past. All I heard was we had this example and we actually work without being told to make that better for people. So I appreciate the need to save trees and to really center on the health and equity of having a healthy environment, but I don't want to rush those recommendations through because coming back then to the world that is kind of my number one priority, which is creating housing for people in the city that needs it the most. I don't want to add one more thing for people to weaponize against development. That worries me a lot. I know that there's all this information that we have gotten from places like Seattle that has they're very innovating when it comes to protecting trees. But then Seattle is also one of the largest places on the nation with the largest unsheltered population of people. I don't know what they do there. I don't know what their balance is. So I just kind of like I said the other night on the last meeting that we had, I just want to I hope that we can be a little bit cautious about putting language that is going to be interpreted by some people and anger them more when we come to decisions of doing new development. So, that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Is there further input, comments? Commissioner Solheim.
I also appreciate all of the, comments, Chair Zellers, that you provided after going through it. A lot of it was very common sense or clarifying or even correcting. And I'd like to at least incorporate those additions. I think, for me, even the additional tree language was more clarifying. However, I think the ordinance proposed by staff does have added language to kind of accommodate or at least clarify the situation or the process that we've already started to employ when we review projects. So I think that covers it. If members want to pause and take more time to consider any additional language beyond that, I would understand that. I'm a little hesitant to add more language regarding the airport noise, but I think other than those two items, really everything else was, in my perspective, very straightforward. So I would be open to kind of a modified motion that incorporated those additional comments, other than, I guess, that would be number 4 and number 5 in your notes, if that makes sense.
So I think we would need a motion then to amend the main motion to add all but whatever the two were you noted?
Yes, I guess I'll make said motion to include the comments shared by Chair Zellers, other than numbers 4 and 5, addressing additional tree and airport noise regulation.
Is there a second to that motion? Second by Commissioner Mendez. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Solheim?
Not further, thank you.
Okay. Any input on the amendment before we vote on the amendment to the main motion? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes, and now we're on to the amended main motion. Are there further comments or discussion on the amended main motion? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you, and congratulations to Tom, Tim, Heather, staff, and everyone who worked so hard on this ordinance. And I agree with Alder Figueroa Cole that it is a sorely needed change. So I'm glad that we are recommending it to council. So thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we will move on to business by members. Any business by members? Seeing no raised hands, Secretary's report. Heather.
Thank you, Chair. Reviewing the Common Council actions at their last meeting, most of you are probably aware the council did not approve the redevelopment proposal at Johnson, Dayton, and Bassett. They did approve the rezoning on South High Point Road, the Hope in a Future project that had been before you. Looking forward, on our July 10th meeting, which I will be absent for that meeting. It'll be led by Kevin Furco on July 10th. I'm just going to provide the highlights of that meeting. First, only a highlight because it's the first amendment back to you. We're looking at an Alder initiated amendment to the transit-oriented development overlay. That's a narrow amendment allowing for an exception to the height and story minimum. We'll also have a significant project on University Row. It's a 180,000 square foot addition to the existing clinic at that site. And then let's see. Moving forward, I think skipping ahead to July 24th, I'm going to mention just a few projects here. One is a project that's been in the media recently at 18 to 30 North Carroll Street, demolition of the Wisconsin Historical Museum for construction of a new museum at that site. This will involve a certified survey map as well as 2 demolitions, and then the Plan Commission's review of the proposed new building, followed by the Urban Design Commission's review. And then I'll also mention at 526 Penny Street, this is a conditional use for construction of a 4-story mixed-use building on the Royster Clark site. And I think those are the main highlights for those 2 upcoming meetings. Again, I will not be with you on July 10th, but look forward to seeing you all again late next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. So with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Solheim, seconded by Commissioner Shepherd. And we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you on July 10th. Take care.